It's great to be back with everyone. We've got an excellent webinar for you. And those of you who've been to these webinars before know that I frequently say that. We have an excellent webinar for you. But this time I want to make a point that when we envision doing the National Good Food Network webinars in this fashion, the type of information we're going to talk about today and present, the depth and really digging deep into something that's important was what we really envisioned. So I hope you'll stay with us the whole time as we go through this journey around this critical issue of affordability and price and getting a good price back to the farming sector as well as an affordable product beyond. And there's no one better to work to present that today than Michael Rosine, who's with us, as well as a grower that he works with, Barney Hodges. But I'll introduce those later. So before we go back to that, let me say a quick word about the Wallace Center. The Wallace Center at Winrock International has been a leading organization in the movement for a more sustainable and equitable food system for over 26 years. Today, the center supports entrepreneurs and communities as they build a new 21st century food system that's healthier for people, the environment, and the economy. The center serves a growing community of civic, business, and philanthropic organizations involved in building a new food system in the U.S. In particular, we're focused on advancing regional and collaborative efforts around the country to move good food, healthy, green, fair, and affordable food beyond the direct marketing realm into larger wholesale channels. So with that, let me turn it back over to Jeff, who'll tell you a bit about the National Good Food Network.
Thanks, John. The National Good Food Network is structured as a network of networks, ensuring efficient flow of information and innovation from boots-on-the-ground projects to the national level and back down to the grassroots level across the nation. It really is a key initiative of the Wallace Center that illustrates our market-based strategy with the goal of moving more good food to more people. The Wallace Center coordinates and supports this network. Our goals are to work with the growers to ensure that there is an abundant supply to meet the high demand, collect and disseminate the best models, stories, methods, and outcomes, and to ensure that policymakers are informed about the wonderful successes our network and partners have had so that we continue to increase support regional healthy food. So let me tell you about some of our current projects designed to meet those goals. A regional food hub is a business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products, primarily from local and regional producers, for the purpose of strengthening producer capacity and access to wholesale, retail, and institutional markets. The NGFN Food Hub collaboration has been studying food hubs and will soon be coming out with a food hub resource guide published by collaboration member USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. The collaboration has established a growing community of practice where hub managers and supporters can share knowledge and best practices to accelerate this work. We will be providing technical assistance as well as communicating successes, positive impacts, and good models. The Field Guide to the New American Food Shed is a web-based tool along with a comprehensive outreach program intended to teach producers and those who might offer them credit about the wide range of business possibilities available in this new food marketplace. The tool is designed to allow multiple information entry points for all learning styles, and there is a strong emphasis on case studies to illustrate the points. Learn more about this project by watching the archived November 2011 NGFN webinar or visiting the site. And of note, Sunrise Orchards presenting today is one of the case studies on this site. So go to foodshedguide.org to learn more. The NGFN has teamed up with Farm Credit Council to execute the Evaluating and Improving Educational Instruments and Outreach, or EIEIO program, with an emphasis on working in the southern U.S. states. This program will create a toolkit of resources for those who train farmers on financial skills and business literacy. We have established a community of practice of these trainers, and working with them, we will ensure that all of the critical financial skills are effectively passed on to their students. The project will also includes identifying gaps and creating content to fill those gaps. The NGFN works with partners critical to the success and impact of the NGFN, including Marty Grenzer at Works Marketing Connections, USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, Wellspring Management, Origins, and Farm Credit Council. Together with our national and regional partners, we're working on several projects in service of the goals of the NGFN. This map gives you a sense that we truly are a national network, and you should feel free to contact us at any time. Email us at contact@ngfn.org. And here are a few other web and email addresses you should note. So thanks, John, and back to you.
All right, great. Let me introduce Michael and Barney now, and then we'll turn it over to them. Michael Rosine is the founder and managing director of Red Tomato, which is a nonprofit marketing organization whose mission is connecting farmers and consumers through marketing, trade, and education. Red Tomato coordinates distribution of produce from several dozen family farmers to supermarkets in the greater metropolitan Boston area. Before Red Tomato, Michael co-founded and served as director of marketing for Equal Exchange, a fair trade food business that trades directly with small farmer, coffee, cocoa, tea cooperatives in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Equal Exchange employs 90 people, has an annual revenues of $23 million, and distributes coast to coast through natural food stores, food co-ops, universities, and so on. Good to have Michael with us today. And Barney Hodges is the owner of Sunrise Orchards in Vermont, as Jeff mentioned, as well as Vermont Refrigerated Storage. Barney grew up on the farm at Sunrise Orchards. He was raised in the apple business and was always keenly interested in all parts of the business. Over the years, he's done all the jobs on the farm, from cutting root suckers and pruning, to picking and packing, to driving the truck, the forklift, and the mower. However, now he spends his time doing the planning, the apple sales, and development and management of his storage facility in Vermont. Barney feels that their investments in infrastructure and their strong commitment to quality and customers have been critical to the financial viability of Sunrise Orchards and Vermont Refrigerated Storage. So with that, let me turn it over to my friend Michael, who has many years of experience, as you can see, and we really look forward to what he and Barney have to say.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just trying to gain control of the slides here. Okay. Tech point, don't have control of the slides. I bet almost everybody in the phone has been on a farm and heard farmers talking, if not complaining, about the rising cost of fertilizer, equipment, machinery, labor, boxes and bags, and the point there being that the costs are going up faster, and sometimes much faster, than the price the growers are able to get back. Next slide. Actually, go back. Language. When I say price, I'm going to be referring to what is being paid, what your customers pay for your farm product. And when I say cost, I'm talking about what you pay or bear or suffer covering your own expenses. An opportunity being an example of a non-monetary cost. And that's how I'll use cost price. So it's the cost price squeeze, what economists used to describe that situation that growers always find themselves in. And the squeeze at times is unbearable. This is nothing unusual, though. Let's keep in mind that all businesses regularly experience some kind of a cost price squeeze. Next slide. In the fall of 1982, in a moment of weakness, I began fantasizing that I was Robert Redford. My favorite movie, All the President's Men, is the story about perhaps the greatest investigative journalist exercise of the last 100 years when they busted the Watergate scandal. And had I not been in this career, I think I would have wanted to be an investigative journalist. It was the fall of 1982 when I found myself as the buyer of grains, including sunflower seeds, for the Northeast cooperatives in Massachusetts. And over the course of time, I found myself paying somewhere in the 50 to 60 cent per pound range for organic sunflower seeds. One company, Red River Commodities, kept offering me organic sunflower seeds for 5 to 10 cents a pound less than any of the medium and large-scale organic farms and organic packers could do. And as I began to talk to the organic growers themselves, I got one of the better lessons I've ever had in the cost price squeeze, this at the start of my career. And basically, as I learned more from the organic growers about their costs, about their scale, about what it took to legitimately manage organic production, segregation of product, and the risk they undertook, it occurred to me that Red River couldn't possibly be doing this business, maintaining their profit margin, and undercutting these growers 5 to 10 cents a pound all the time. So I flew out to Fargo, North Dakota, and long story short, after interviewing many of the parties involved, figured out that in fact this was a fraud. And it resulted in a national story and my 15 seconds of glory as Robert Redford. But what I really got here was a clear understanding of that cost price squeeze as experienced by small and medium-sized growers in the United States. I learned that pennies matter. Pennies per pound are a big deal to growers, especially of commodities. I learned that the cost side had everything to do with the price side. And I learned that it doesn't take more than one large-scale purveyor of a product in this country to completely disrupt the market. Next slide. The price conundrum. What we got here in the National Good Food Network is an advanced case of the cost-price squeeze. Good food and the values that most of us subscribe to insist that the farmers get paid a fair price. Not only a fair price, but a price that enables growers to pay their workers a fair price. And then we also want that food should reach the marketplace at a price that's affordable to consumers. You can see why I call it an advanced cost price squeeze. We're holding ourselves accountable for more than the ordinary transaction. That is the price conundrum. How the sustainable farmer can afford her tomato, or what we'll talk about today, how Barney Hodges can afford his own apple. Take it, Barney.
Thank you, Michael. So now it's my turn to see if I can achieve technical control of the slideshow. And it looks like I am not able to, but this is a good slide to start on. So my role in this talk is really from the farmer's perspective, how is this real stuff that we're talking about? So just to give the audience, and yes, now I do have control. I see that. Thank you. To give the audience a sense of our farm and who we are, just a brief overview. Our farm's located in Vermont, in Cornwall, Vermont. It's a couple hundred acres of apples, purely wholesale apples. There are 3 generations that live on the farm. My father and mother planted the farm in the 70s. My dad is from Virginia, where he grew up on a farm as well, a peach, apple, and cattle farm. My mother is a New Englander through and through, and there were some threats back in the late 60s, early 70s that said we best be moving to Vermont, or else Virginia really wasn't for a good place for my mother's New England roots. So we came up to Vermont, and my folks bought a dairy farm and planted it into apples. 130 acres originally planted of traditional New England varieties, Paula Reds, Max, Empire, Cortland, McCowan, Red Delicious, and more recently Honeycrisp. So our first crop was, let's see here, our first crop was 32 bushels in 1978. And by 1985, which is more when this picture was taken, we were producing around 50,000 bushels annually. And this year, just to give some perspective, we picked over 140,000 bushels. The sense I want to give you right now at this part of my talk is really where our business was 10 years ago. So planting the orchard, developing what was considered at the time to be a very high density, efficient, high yield producing wholesale farm. It was a horizontally integrated business. We worked with, and we still do work with, Jamaican apple pickers from Jamaica. We bring those folks in on a legal work visa program called the H-2A program. we are still very dependent on that source of labor. But more importantly, the horizontally integrated business of that time, the apples were picked in bulk bins, brought into a centralized loading facility where the fruit was tagged and brought down to a central facility located in Shoreham, which is about 10 miles away. This facility is where all the post-harvest work began or begins. This is the facility that is still in operation today, but more importantly, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the horizontally integrated wholesale farm was growing the apples only, and then someone else stored, shipped, packed, distributed, and really took a lot of the revenue that was available out of the apple dollar that was in the bin. So the squeeze in that type of a model really happened as the global market, the globalization of our economy changed. And for us, it was really in 1992 when this type of horizontal integration began to collapse. The grower worked hard and did a service for the food system, but it ended at this building for us. The true benefits of the global economy were certainly for the consumer, for lower price, and the wholesale buyer began to have a lot of control in that situation. The discussion became heavily weighted toward price, less so for quality, in the sense that there was less conversation about quality, and relationships became less important, particularly as wholesale buyers move through their kind of corporate ladder progression. Usually you don't have long-term relationships with buyers. It's a person who's responsible for your product for a year or two, and then he or she may move on to something else. So the squeeze really in this type of horizontal model is downward price pressure while costs continue to rise. So we're getting downward pressure from the top and cost pressures, increased cost pressures from the bottom. I mean, it's typical in many businesses, not just the Apple business, but that is the true squeeze that's going on. And there's very little say that we as growers in that model have on price in that discussion, where the price discussion is really removed from our control. So at the end of the day, the grower has a $20 box of apples, and from that $20 box of apples, the growing, the trucking, the storage, the packing, the cardboard, the marketing fees are all taken out of that $20 box, and we're left with a number which I'm actually going to share with you in a few moments. But that is what the wholesale apple market or the wholesale apple industry looked like 15, 20 years ago, and it's very different today. And at this point, I'm going to hand the control over back to Michael.
Hey, Barney, this is John.
Yeah.
Before we hand it back to Michael, there's been a flurry of questions around the term horizontal model of business.
Okay.
And I know you kind of detailed that out quite a bit, so maybe if you could just sum it up in one, sum it all up, it might help people really grasp what you're trying to say.
To summarize what I mean by the horizontal model, there's a whole slew of services and work that needs to be done to get the apple from the bud, the apple blossom, all the way through to the consumer's hand. And it was traditionally many people. It's believed that other people can be really efficient and specialized in their thing, i.e. a trucker is going to be much more efficient if he can truck your fruit and other people's products and be focused on maintenance of his truck and doing just trucking than it will be if I'm trying to do that as well as grow apples. it's better if other people can pack fruit for you and focus on all the efficiencies to be gained in apple packing rather than me as a grower focus on that as well as my responsibilities. So horizontal integration is spreading out those responsibilities to specialists, and allows me as an operator to specialize in growing apples.
Right, and that's how it was in the 70s, you said, or back
70s, 80s, and
70s.
90s is what
Okay, great.
I would say. Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay,
Yep.
Michael.
Okay. So this is an example of a price. It's close enough to real that would tie Sunrise Orchards to Red Tomato. Red Tomato in this relationship is acting as a marketing agent. We don't have our own warehouse and trucks. We orchestrate the whole supply chain without bricks and mortar. So in this example, Barney's receiving $20 for a 40-pound case of apples. We're paying an independent trucker or Barney $1.60 a case to get it to the distributor. Red Tomato takes its 10 or 11% gross margin, which is figured on the distributor price because they're our customer. The distributor then is paying the sum of those three numbers, $24.40. The distributor is making 14% in this example, or $4 a case, selling it to the retailer, who is paying $28.40, and then the retailer is putting on a 45% gross margin and selling the apples for $1.29 a pound, which for the whole case comes to $51.60. Keep this model in mind as we go through the rest of the points here. So that was a price. What's a good price or a fair price? In years of conversations about fair trade, a concept that I hear over and over again is that a fair price exceeds the grower's cost of production, enabling the grower to have enough to earn a small profit, but also enough to reinvest and improve the business and ensure the long-term survivability of the farm. So there's an assumption embedded in that. Exceeds the cost of production. Well, that means that you have to know your cost of production. So if you're a grain grower out west and you have 400 or 1,000 or 2,000 acres of one or two products, Cooperative Extension can provide you with tools that can help you figure out your cost of production rather accurately. But if you've got a 50 to 100 acre diversified vegetable farm in the eastern half of the United States and you're raising 200 different varieties of vegetables, it gets extremely difficult to know the cost of any one item. You could certainly average and come up with average costs, but it's a totally different ballgame. The other thing here that I think is really important is the importance of context. I just described some of the differences between farms, but what we've learned on the job at Red Tomato is that different farms have different costs of production, and that's not only about product mix. That's a lot about the size, the scale of the farm. It can be about the location, proximity to markets. It can be about management style and ability. It can be about the cost of labor. And because different farms have different costs of production, it ends up, in our case, and I think in the case of other food hubs, that we will sometimes pay a different price to a different farm for the same item on the same day. And I'll explain why and how a little bit later. But right now, let's just say what seems obvious. A good deal is about more than just price. So here are some of the elements. What I want to talk about now is what are the elements of a good transaction or a good deal. And I'll go through them one by one here. I won't read this list, but I'll give you 10 seconds now to just read down this list of bullets, which is where we'll go. And in this, I'm going to make a point of translating back each one of these into economic terms, into profitability. So we'll start with volume. there's something about this that's obvious. So the food business, low margin business, and the way you compensate for low margin is with high volume. But there's more going on here. In writing and preparing this, one of the conversations that we had was about small growers. So what about small growers? If volume is the answer to low margins, does that mean that small growers shouldn't be wholesaling? Or are they inherently kind of have to suffer lower profitability? And the answer is, well, it goes back to context. I mean, everybody's marketing situation and economic and farm situation is so different that the answer there is no, not necessarily. But it could be that small growers are actually the ones who are better suited for smaller wholesale relationships, such as direct delivery to a restaurant or direct delivery to a retail store. Wholesaling on a larger scale calls for infrastructure like refrigeration and delivery equipment, trucks. And it probably takes more volume to afford that infrastructure. It's certainly true at Red Tomato that the larger growers are the ones who tend to be involved in the deals and the programs with the larger retail customers. There's no way that we would send an unrefrigerated truck to the docks of some of our larger customers. Do all red tomato growers have extensive infrastructure? No, that's not the case. But it does kind of segment into which programs they're best suited for. So the thing about volume here is that it is an obvious way to compensate for lower prices. And it explains why, on a certain given day, red tomato may sell one farm's Macintosh to one customer at one price and sell it in another program to a different customer at another price. It's because we've figured out which farms to match with which programs, and it's about all of the factors that I mentioned. Second aspect of a good deal, second element here, is planning. Advanced planning is worth a lot for growers. It's the best way to match production to sales. It's also a way in the end to reduce waste and to allow for innovation. So we have a really fresh example here at Red Tomato. This morning we had a couple in from Western Massachusetts, and we were talking about a unique specialty vegetable that they grow for our program. And we've done it as an experiment for a few years, but we've gotten to the point where it's worked well enough that we're all interested to see if we can scale this thing up. We've sold only 350 cases of this item, and we're ready to push toward 1,000 and beyond it and start offering it to more than just one customer. So here's where planning comes in, and that does translate back to their profitability. So far, we have matched this production level to one customer only. But what we were talking about this morning was extending the current season of 6 weeks and figuring out how to make it 15 weeks long by involving other growers north and south of the growers who visited this morning. If we can extend the season and more than triple the volume overall, we can begin to turn this into an item that we can really offer to everybody that we serve. The thing about planning is to try to get the volume marketed in sync and in balance with the demand that you're currently serving. If you don't have enough, then you inevitably are providing disservice to the customers because there are gaps in the season. But if you have too much, then you suddenly end up in a position of weakness, and that typically leads to having to lower the price there. So the way this translates to directly to profitability is in the effort to avoid excess capacity, hold on to as much bargaining power you have, and keep the focus on moving the product and not having to sell surplus. So that is not a picture of an apple tree. It's a redwood. And the concept here is about long-term relationships that allow for a kind of communication and feedback between the grower and the customer, and in the best of circumstances, with the actual consumer. which gives the grower the information needed to keep improving the product. So this may sound kind of obvious, but I would say in a very high proportion of wholesale deals and transactions, that feedback loop is not there. And so the growers are kind of surrendering their product into a black hole, and they don't hear back. And usually not hearing back means, well, you could kind of assume everything went okay. But it is so important, both to growers and to just continuous improvement in the business, to getting that kind of feedback loop. There's another way that those long-term relationships really translate to profitability. And a great example has occurred at Red Tomato as we've suffered 5 successive years of pretty traumatic weather events in our biggest crop, which are apples. Hey, Barney, can you tell us a little bit about hail and what it's been like trying to hold on to customers?
Yeah. We have suffered 3 consecutive kind of catastrophic events at our farm, and you know, the challenge, certainly the long-term relationship like the one we have with Red Tomato, hopefully will be invaluable. We'll find out next year, but I am confident that Red Tomato and their commitment to us will be there. But you know, for us, it's really it sort of feels, as I listen to Michael talk about some of these things, that these are all really great, good elements and important qualities to have in developing profitability. But when you have catastrophic events occur, it becomes a right now issue. And so what we've gotten good at in these types of years is really figuring out how short-term planning becomes critical. What's remarkable is we've gotten good at that short-term planning, so now we've shifted back to long-term planning. And so, you know, I believe there's silver linings in everything, and ultimately these types of relationships that Michael's speaking of really are important once you can get over the shock of weather events.
The dramatic moment for the Red Tomato Network, there are 20 certified eco-apple growers in our network, and about 2 years ago, facing our 3rd catastrophic year of hail and cold weather, premature cold weather in a row, we sat around, a bunch of growers and scientists, and we elected to add several new large growers to the network, even though we weren't yet saturated in terms of doing all the marketing we wanted for the growers sitting in the room. But the 15 growers who were there recognized that this is not going to go away. If we don't bring in more backup capacity, then we may not be able to hold on to those markets. And so the growers elected to do that, and we found even after we've added 6 other growers, we still don't have enough backup capacity. This one is probably more on everybody's mind. Efficient logistics can make $1 or $2, and in some cases even more than that, difference per case on a load. And that is really the margin that separates kind of a mediocre price from a good price. So there's tremendous power in getting the logistics right. And the way that we save money on getting the logistics right has to do with, I think, things that are also on everybody's mind. One is aggregation. Find ways to bring 4 growers together into a single delivery instead of going in as separate loads. Utilize, for Red Tomato, we try to utilize the growers in our network as much as possible, which is always a more efficient and less costly way to move food around. Backhauls, which mean that our customers' trucks, on their return from their own deliveries, stop by the farms, is almost always both efficient and a way to save money. And then just find ways to get orders in full-size pallets. We are very often charged for trucking in a per-pallet charge. We're hardly ever shipping entire truckloads of product. We're doing what's called LTL, less than a full load trucking. But if we can put 70 cases on a pallet that's costing us $65 to move, then that per case cost is going to be half as much as if we're only putting 35 cases on the same pallet. Those kinds of configurations are what we're playing with on every transaction that we're working with there.
Michael, a quick interjection, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially in rural states, this efficiency or lack thereof is really what small farms and even large farms have trouble hurdling. So this is a huge, huge point and element of a good deal. I just want to reinforce that from the grower side.
Okay. Thanks, Barney. This one almost speaks for itself. So the cost of money, maybe it's not something that growers sit around and analyze in a highly quantitative way, but I think everyone is aware that if you can be paid on 15 to 30 days, then you have a really reliable, valuable customer. I've heard some stories about organizations in the institutional food service markets, and we've experienced this a little ourselves, who get paid on 3 to 6 months because that's a standard practice in the food service world. And obviously at that point, credit is necessary to cover the payment that slow. And if it's one of your major customers, then it becomes a serious issue. But we are aiming at Red Tomato to be paid in 30 days or less, and we pay growers on average on 21. And that kind of fast turnaround almost balances itself out. So now we're getting to a place where I think it really speaks, this part of the deal really speaks to the price point conundrum and the issues of food security. So when we do a grower's satisfaction survey every year in winter, one of the comments we get very regularly is, move more of my crop. And what that usually is referring to is not necessarily, I want you to sell more volume overall. It's often pointing out the fact that we may be asking a grower for only one particular grade. Often they're premium, the best in a particular pack-out. But in terms of profitability, in the moments where we can sell the premium large 2 3/4 inch plus peaches and the small and mediums, the 2.5 inch peaches, then we're taking the whole pack out, and all of a sudden there's a direct translation to profitability for that grower. Think about every crop in the world of produce. Every crop has its own particular second grade definition. So if it's zucchini or summer squash, medium size, worth a lot less than large size. Cucumbers, same thing. The little picklers tend to be worth the most. The large cucumbers are worth considerably less, and the curved cucumbers even less. In the world of tomatoes, peaches, and apples, bigger is better, small tends to be worth less. And every single item has its own story. So the interesting thing is, as we, I think everybody here is probably thinking, scratching their head, and realizing what an opportunity there is to sell super fresh, quote, second grade material into markets that are really serving middle low-income people and actually creating a real win-win opportunity there. This is an important item, I think, going in both directions, back to the farm and also to the retailer or the food service operation. I think the situation for all of us is to try to figure out how to balance all these elements of a good deal and create a situation where the growers are feeling like this is absolutely working for them, and we're relieving pressure on price alone. Because when we have these conversations, very often the only thing we're talking about is the actual monetary number, instead of looking at the whole transaction and the whole deal as it affects the grower and as it affects the customer. The last element here is not to be underestimated. And now we're talking about the relationship between the grower and the food hub. And one thing that took me a while to learn, but that I never forget anymore, is that trust and respect, transparency, good communication go a long, long way for growers. Growers have been at the raw end of the wholesale deal for so many decades. Many bailed out entirely. Others just try to minimize their interactions with either terminal markets or consignment houses or places that did not offer them the trust or respect or transparency. And it's pretty interesting how important transparency is becoming in just ordinary, I'd say, in my interactions in the produce world. You don't only hear about this in good food circles or at farms. And I think this is a place where those of us in the good food movement can really shine. We've used the language of the dignity deal at Red Tomato to describe the kind of communication and relationship we try to build with growers. And the results and the translation to profitability have to do with all the things we mentioned above, the other elements which can't be accomplished without these things, or at least these things allow for better execution of the above. The picture here shows a father-son team, the Drazens, Eli and Gordon Drazen. Gordon is in his mid-80s and is still on the orchard working every day there. And I would say that this is a card that every one of us should not only be playing, but should just be practicing all the time. Barney, give us the same from your point of view. Take us deep into Sunrise Orchard.
Okay. So the shift now in the conversation comes back to Sunrise Orchards, and I think it becomes more real, and listeners can sort of, I want to try to show what has happened, from the kind of collapse of the horizontal model that I described earlier to now, and hopefully some of the elements that Michael brought up will come through in what I'm talking about. But really, I want to give listeners kind of an example of what happened in the real farming world as a result of the squeeze. And the squeeze is still going on. The conundrum still exists. But this is a view of our orchard, one view of our orchard, and it's a beautiful site, and that's really important to realize that the site and location of our orchard for growing is excellent. The collapse of the horizontal model really took 10 years to happen, that the wholesale New England apple farm, as we knew it, where we grew apples really well, but we relied on others to complete the chain, really has gone by the wayside. The change, or the last, say, from 2002 to present, Sunrise Orchards, in order to stay in business, needed to come up with a new model. And I believe the model is that we are now a vertically integrated business. So where we were once relying on others for trucking, packing, storage, sales, we now do that ourselves. But to sort of explain how we got there and give you some real numbers to work with and how drastic a change it is. In 1998, we raised around 100,000 bushels, probably maybe a little more. Our gross revenues were only $450,000. That's $4.50 per bushel to grow and harvest the crop and deal with other operating expenses like insurance and things like that. In 2008, after we haven't completed our integration, but we've done a lot to get there, our gross revenues were $2.5 million, or $25 a bushel on the same approximate 100,000 bushels. The average price per bushel paid to us did increase some, but not that drastically. That increase in revenue is a result of changing our business model to a vertical model. The more integration we have, the more costs we have. Obviously, we have to pay for that cardboard. We have to pay for the fuel to put in those tractor-trailer trucks. We have to pay for the storage and the packing ourselves, and we have to maintain them, and we have to become experts in those things. But the trade-off is more control, more understanding of what all those people who we used to complain about in the old model, saying those brokers, they take all our money, and those truckers, you know, they make a profit and don't care about our apples, and, you know, all of the people along that chain, the growers can get pretty negative about. But the reality is everybody works hard for their money, and we all have to be good at what we do. And in the vertical model, we become experts in all of those things. So in 1998, we were desperate. We had very little control in what we were getting paid. And what did we have to work with? We had apples. We had great apples, and we had a great location for growing. Our location, many of you may wonder, you know, what are we going to be doing? Let's see. What are we going to be? Why are we not starting a retail business? Why are we aren't in a good location for that. But we are in a location where we have these great apples and we have this great high yield farm. So we did need to develop our own relationships. And in 1998, we developed our first relationships by selling fruit directly to retailers. We call that DSD, or store door deliveries, where that was kind of the beginning of the local movement, where farmers, ourselves, were one of the first in our area to bring apples directly to the stores. I should be careful. My father claims he did it back in the 40s and 50s, but it was before that sort of horizontal model. So in the new vertical age, that was a new thing. We bought our first delivery truck. We purchased the storage facility that was the former Shoreham Apple Co-op in 2004. We began packing our own fruit on our farm on location in 2002. We began distributing interstate distribution in 2005 when we bought our first tractor-trailer truck. But really what I want to share with folks today is the connection to an organization like Red Tomato and what those types of relationships can really do. So in this slide, I know you've been staring at it for a few minutes, you know, you still see our family-owned business, our wholesale farm. That hasn't changed. Our reliance on great employees, both local and foreign. We also have a growing style. Our growing style is not an organic growing style, but our advanced IPM approach, which has always been prevalent in what we do, is a strength of ours as well. And that is something that we've been able to capitalize on through Red Tomato. The continued integration of our business, as I just described, occurs in the storage facility, on the packing line, the distribution of our fruit in our own trucks, and our own sales staff. So now we're doing those things that we used to hire other people to do, and we capture more of that apple sale dollar. Each one of those things has margin in it, and now we're bringing ourselves from that $450,000 business to that $2.5 million business. With those added expenses comes more risk, but it also comes more control, and that's really healthy. So over those early years in that integration, there was one thing we really lacked. And, whereas we were able to move, now we move approximately 40% of our apples through relatively local channels directly to supermarkets in Vermont. We still, in 2002, we lacked a connection with a really decent organization, which is what Red Tomato is, but in the sort of more conventional world, I'm speaking of a broker. I wouldn't say Red Tomato is a broker, but we were not able in Vermont to move all of our fruit, so we needed that relationship element, and we got that when we met Red Tomato in 2002. And another component of the vertical integration is capitalizing on the growing style and the pest management style of what we're doing, integrated pest management. And Red Tomato was able to help with that by developing a program called the Eco Apple Program, which has a third-party certification in a similar fashion that an organic line would, to really make transparent and highlight the growing practices that we do, using pests, beneficials to control flare-ups of bad pests, using really careful scouting methods to quantify what the severity of an infestation may be before treatment, putting quantifiable measures before us before making decisions to use pesticides, and being able to market that to the wholesale market and to the consumer, eventually to the consumer. So that's something that Red Tomato brought with them, as well as their the values and the importance of transparency that they brought to the table for us. So this was an opportunity. Being at the ground level and beginning our growth in the wholesale market as a vertically integrated business was very important to us, and it was very important to Red Tomato to have a grower like Sunrise who was large and had an ability to provide infrastructure to them. And I think one of the connections I want to make here is that the growth together translated into success together. Improvements in my business as a result of working with an organization like Red Tomato, which is a different type of relationship than a traditional wholesale broker, is a result of transparency. Red Tomato went to bat for us all the time, trying to get better prices, because at their core, Red Tomato fights for better prices for growers. Transparency is at their core. Their open relationship, what comes with their open relationship with us is trust. We don't have to waste time wondering if Red Tomato is telling us the truth, or if they're holding funds from us that really are rightly ours. They're with us. They're part of our organization. And Red Tomato has really helped us utilize our investments in our vertically integrated business. By understanding their needs, Sunrise has been able to collaborate with Red Tomato. Understanding their needs has allowed us to provide them more than what they may get from someone else. They see our investment in our infrastructure. They need that type of infrastructure, and that type of infrastructure opens opportunities for me to do more business with them in an outlet that is more profitable. So in the case of Sunrise Orchards, we've in Red Tomato, I think we've really found a partnership that we can build on, and we kind of view the revenues generated through that relationship as a whole other component of our sales strategy. So we have our direct store delivery, where we sell direct to our own customers here in Vermont, and our relationship with Red Tomato as a very balanced approach to being a wholesale grower in New England. We still have our productive, high-yielding, pretty large wholesale plantings. We haven't changed that, but we have changed the way that we capture the money from every bushel that we produce, and it's a better model, and it's now allowed for some stability even in challenging years, and it's allowed us to continue to think and grow. I mean, there's still plenty of more work to do. There's weather challenges that bother us every year. There's better modeling and better, we need to be better business people. Farmers often don't take enough time to analyze their systems and evaluate their processes. Our farm is 35 to 40 years old, so there's going to be a whole new wave of replanting that we're going to have to do on our farm. There's new investments in facilities because now we have all this equipment. We have to strengthen them and improve them with, as food safety issues become more of a challenge, we have to invest in those things. We have to build our own brand even outside of the Red Tomato brand, because even all of our eggs in the Red Tomato basket would not be a healthy, balanced world for us. So developing, and we have to continue to develop stable relationships in a very unstable
Barney?
World of buyers. Yes.
Can I just jump in? There's been a slew of questions.
Okay.
You've given a lot of information about your relationship and the benefits of working with Red Tomato. If I could just ask Michael to explain to our audience, the elevator speech on what is Red Tomato. There's been a lot of questions around how you function, what is the function, and that kind of thing. So maybe the back of the envelope, Michael.
Okay. So Red Tomato is a decentralized food hub located in southeastern Massachusetts. What I mean by that is we operate no bricks and mortar, no warehouse, none of our own trucks. We work with 40 growers. We have annual sales just under $3 million, and our place is to be the connector between those growers and mostly supermarkets. We have a complete kind of service that includes product development, packaging design, all logistics coordination. We buy the product from growers. We coordinate the delivery of everything to the customers, and then we provide a lot of support to the retailers in the way of promotion, storytelling, information sharing, food safety support for the growers. So come back to call ourselves a decentralized food hub.
Great.
And
appreciate that.
And I'm actually really right at the end of what I was going to talk about. I mean, the last thing I was going to say is just, there hasn't been tremendous changes to our orchard per se, in that we're still have the same plantings. We need to improve that, but we're still the same business. We've just taken on more of the responsibility of the supply chain, and we've alleviated the squeeze for time being. There's a lot of work to do to keep ahead of the squeeze, and I still think we're in a conundrum, but I'm very optimistic about our future, and feeling nimble and ready for a non-hail, non-frost damaged crop, which I'm sure will come this year, right? I think that's kind of how I want to leave this audience, with optimism about what we're doing and where we're heading. So with that, I'm back to you, Michael.
Okay. John Fisk, selling to the consumer. Do you want to introduce this subject and pass to me?
I hadn't planned on it, but let me maybe just a few words. I mean, I think we've talked today a lot about what accounts for the price, right? All the different dynamics back from the farm into the food hub, what accounts for the price that the consumer sees. I think part of what we want to do, you and I want to do now really briefly, is talk about maybe what can be done at beyond the food hub into the retail sector around price. So let me turn it back to you with that. I think you've got an example and I've got a quick example.
Okay. So in eastern Massachusetts, the supermarket that probably gets the most credit for providing decent food, decent affordable food, is a chain called Market Basket, also known as Demula's Market Basket. And I was walking there a couple weeks ago, just about the same time I was working on the script and the presentation for this webinar. And I visited one of their brand spanking new rebuilt stores in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is right next to the Terminal Produce Market in Boston. And I was just bowled over. I walked into this enormous store, and the first thing in the produce department that I saw was what I expected, which was a display of ethnic root crops. And there was an entire aisle of them: Malanga Blanca, Malanga Coco, 4 kinds of Badia, Acho Chile, California Chile, Arbol Chile, blah, 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 and on and on and on. And then I started to walk around, and I realized that this store did an amazing job in all kinds of ways. The aisles were wide enough you could have shopped with Volkswagens driving through the aisles. There were 37 checkout counters. It was midday, and the place was packed, and people were filling their baskets to kind of heaping mountains. But the thing that really caught my eye was how fresh everything was. And you can say, well, when you reach that kind of turnover, you also have a tremendous opportunity there. And the takeaway for me was I started seeing prices that were actually in some ways aggressive, and in other places I recognized a whole lot of products that you'd see at a Whole Foods store with prices that were just about the same, maybe a hair less. And I realized that this is one way to provide excellent, affordable food, but the context, I think, was as important to those shoppers as the low prices were, because not all the prices were low. And it was the freshness, the cleanliness, and the whole service provided that I think really added up to the overall experience. It wasn't only about price. So, John, you want to add yours, and then we can move towards Q&A?
Yeah, let's do that. I think there's the next slide. I just want to kind of support your model with another model on the West Coast called New Seasons Market. New Seasons Market is in Portland, and you know, Portland is a food central, if you will. But Portland, like any other city, has low-income areas, has food deserts, has a real across-the-board mix. New Seasons Market prides itself on being fun, friendly, and filled with delicious food, local foods, but not just local foods, the run-of-the-mill global brands, if you will, that we see, because they know that their clients want foods from across the board. So how do they make it affordable? How do they make it accessible? I was always impressed by, you know, they opened their first few stores probably in, I don't know for sure, but probably in the more upscale neighborhoods. But then when they wanted to set a store in maybe a neighborhood that was not so upscale, that was closer to a mix of low income and medium to high income, they found resistance, say, from the financiers. So they found some alternative financing, and they were able to put that store in what today we would call a food desert, but before it probably wasn't called that. And lo and behold, what they found was that became one of their strongest stores. Their sales were highest there, and it wasn't just for, you know, for the high-end foods. It was across the board again. So with the model, they now have 12 stores in the area, and I was reading their most recent press release, and they've announced that they're opening a 13th store here in the near future in what they technically call a food desert in a neighborhood, and they're working with that neighborhood. They're not just plopping it in there based on demographics or sales data. They're working with the neighborhood to determine what it looks like and what they sell. So you can go into these stores and buy pastured poultry, or you can go in and you can buy Ajax, you know, and what they're finding is that the range of customers, whether they be low income or high income, are buying those products and have access to them. And if they choose them, they do. And I think the other thing it does is it questions the assumption we have that people of low income don't want fresh, healthy, organic food or won't buy it if it's there, even if it is more affordable. And I think this is one data point that says, you know, there are occasions or there are regular times that they will buy these products. They may not do it as often as others based on budgets, but they are still doing it, and there is a need for it. So I think between Michael's example and mine, there's some innovation there, and there's ways of working to provide both a diversity of products and a diversity of prices, and still get a dignity price back to the growers. So with that, I'm going to attempt to moderate questions. You've all been fabulous about sending in lots of questions, and I'm a bit overwhelmed. But let me see if I can pull this out here. So let me go back to one of the core issues that I think you were talking about, Barney, which was this horizontal versus vertical integration. And I think you painted a picture of what it used to look like horizontally and what it looks like now vertically for you. Would you talk a bit about how that has impacted either profitability or margins and that kind of thing? Let's tie it back to the whole issue of price and financial viability, if you would.
Well, I think that it's really quite simple in farming. I think we all want to, we value the lifestyle that we live. We like contributing something meaningful to our communities in the name of food, and we don't want to lose that. So where we want to be secure and plan for the future, I think, you know, the real live farm first and foremost wants to be around next year. And if we're around next year, then maybe we can buy a new tractor to be a more efficient grower, or we want to, you know, be able to get more of our product to someone in our neighboring town. Just simple things like that. And I think that, you know, so profitability might have different meanings to different people, but we want to be able to do this year in and year out, and maybe hand it off to our kids to be able to have the same opportunity. So for us, it was somewhat of a desperate thing, and recognizing what our strengths were. So I think that we look to simply trying to capture more of the dollars in every bushel of apples on the wholesale level as something that we can control and be good at. And I think that turns toward profitability. You know, being excellent and having quality, really high quality product, is something that does translate into profitability, and it translates into building relationships. If we have good products and we do our services well, then folks like Michael Rosine want to work with us. And so then the relationship builds. And the profitability, kind of going back to some of the things that Michael brought forward, the profitability comes from developing those 7 elements that Michael spoke of. So there's kind of a short-term profitability and a long-term profitability aspect to things, and being responsible for more of the supply chain allows for that control and those elements to build. Logistics, being experts in logistics, experts in relationships, experts in our operation. I don't know if I answered your question.
A little bit. Let me just dig a little bit more, because there's some questions around that transition from horizontal to vertical. For example, how did it affect your full-time or long-term labor needs?
Yeah.
How long did it take you to make the transition, and where did you get investment dollars to get into the infrastructure?
Well, that's the last one in particular is a great question. The long-term employment needs, we created more local jobs for people in our town by doing that, because we needed truck drivers, we needed apple packers, we needed people to help us do those things. In terms of the investment dollars, was quite a remarkable transition. It was amazing to see that each year that we did more of the things, the services that other people were doing, our revenue was just going up every year. Growth was nearly easy. So each year that we started doing more of these things, we were generating more gross revenues. The sort of the downside of that, or the scary side of that, really presented itself when we had consecutive weather event years, where as all of that growth was occurring, lagging slightly behind were the increased expenses of operation. And so as that growth is occurring, it's relatively easy to be profitable. It's when you have a leveling off or a drop in revenue where your true business skills come out, and how you handle those changes, because the agriculture business is a series of ups and downs, and you have to understand how to weather the bad times as well as the good. And so I think it's easy to be profitable as you integrate. Once that's more complete and your revenues level off, which is where we're at now, how do we manage that, and then the squeeze starts to get put back on again. But again, without taking too much time, I think it's more easy to do that when you have the control of the various components of that chain.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Let me ask you both a question about, we talked a bit about grade and about margins. I would imagine that, again, in any crop, there's going to be premium grades and not so premium grades. The question is around, how does the not so premium grades, whether we call them seconds or processing grade or whatever, whether it be apples or other products you deal with, Michael, how do those mix into the revenue stream, and how would you suggest others out there manage that themselves? Is that clear?
Not exactly. When you say how does it mix into the revenue streams, just say a little bit more.
So if you've got seconds, what can you expect to do with those so that it's not a loss, so you're going to make some money, right? What are some of the outlets to sell seconds or whatever grade is not premium grade, that kind of a thing, and probably for both of you.
So our first choice is to take, the thing about our language here, it's imprecise, because like when you say seconds, everybody's conjuring up images of inferiority. So get rid of that concept here and go to, there is some objective condition that that we're not meeting, and it could be something that, like a blemish or an imperfection, that's actually a negative, but it also could be something that is just not acceptable in the marketplace. So let's take peaches. So our first attempt, and it's hard to do this, is to take the lower grade stuff and to differentiate it so that it has value and it actually becomes a unique product. So one place where we've been able to do that has been with smaller peaches. We created a farm stand-like looking basket, and we put 3.5 pounds of medium-sized peaches in that basket with a handle on it, and it's screaming our slogan, born and raised here, and it's got the stories of what makes a good peach and about where these peaches came from with the farm name on it. And all of a sudden it looks really attractive. From the shopper's point of view, there is no quality difference between the smaller one and the large one. So there's an example. Best case scenario is create some way to make it, and farm stands do this all the time. Okay, let's say you can't do that. So now we get to, let's take the cucumber, and the larger or the curved cucumber, oftentimes in the marketplace, will just go to a customer who is price sensitive and they know they're getting really fresh stuff, and they in fact will pay $14 instead of $20 for it, a pretty substantial difference. And I think that is the most ordinary way that small fruit moves, and that would be true of Barney's little apples, which make excellent hand fruit for children, which could be sold for $4 to $8 less per case than Barney's premium large apples. Those are some examples. What do you say, Barney?
Well, I would also add that, particularly in our situation where, where now we've integrated our business vertically and we've seen our revenues sort of plateau at a certain point, we now get to do the exciting part, or possibly the next part of development, and that is, because we have a brand, because we sell locally under that brand, we have the opportunity to take the lowest grade, the processed grade fruit that we select out of off the packing line, and turn it into something with more value altogether, a value-added product. Could be applesauce, it could be apple brandy, it could be apple pies, those kinds of things that typically retail farms do very well because they have the public coming right into their farm stand. But in our case, where our investment in our infrastructure includes our brand, we can then make those products, hopefully, which is really the next step of what we need to do here, and turn those into value, above and beyond, well above and beyond what their worth is in the process market. On the other side of it, John, there's the model of product, the product that moves across our grader. Yes, we have that extra fancy grade. You referred to seconds. We call them the fancy grade product. The institutional markets on the wholesale level play a huge role in what a large wholesale operation does. It's very important to have those outlets for that fruit that's even below the grades that Michael's talking. The small apples are still really great extra fancy grade apples, but the ones that may not be fully red, that might have a blemish the size of a quarter on it, but it's still perfectly good eating, those types of things could go to institutions, universities, state organizations, those kinds of things where lots of meals are served. And those organizations and institutions are now interested in buying local product more than they were 5 or 10 years ago. So there's opportunities there as well.
Excellent. Those are some excellent responses on how to manage those, the diversity of products that come out. Let me shift a little bit to ask Michael about red tomato and about, there's a number of questions coming in about its role as a food hub and some of the relationships you have with growers. So would you be willing to tell us a bit about the relationship you have with the growers in terms of contractual of any kind or expectations and coordination? How does that work?
So there are no contracts between us and growers or between us and customers, no written contracts, but we do a lot of winter planning like right now, and at those moments we're really laying out the parameters of what we're going to sell a retailer or what we're expecting to buy from a grower. So lots of talk, lots of planning, but no written contracts. That just wouldn't, whereas you'll see written contracts between people raising produce for the processing market, they're not that common, at least not at our level in the world of produce. Certainly, banana companies have contracts, but I think small purveyors don't. The relationship is really, I think we allow years before we figure a relationship is kind of get to a mature place, and so trust takes time to build up. A lot of times we'll approach a grower, and if they don't know us or they don't know other growers who work with us, there's a lot of kind of standoffish behavior because growers have had a tough time in the wholesale trade. So we have to kind of earn that trust and working relationship over time. And then a lot depends on how did we do the first year. And, our following the motto, under promise and over deliver, kind of go to pains to make sure that whatever we're promising the first year we can fulfill. And that's tricky to do when you filled really hard on those initial approaches.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't sound like there's an agreement, but there's no written expectation and there's certainly no exclusivity, correct?
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
and
there are moments.
There's a huge risk on the buying side or on the marketing and brokering side of things. What if the farmer doesn't have good product, or what if there's a quality issue? I mean, there's risk on both sides, and it's rare for contracts to be in place because of the quality issues that can come up.
And when, thank you, and when the product hits the shelf, Michael, for example, the apples that Barney sells, how are they labeled? Does it carry the brand of the farm forward, or are they red tomato, or are they eco
Both.
apples? Both, so it can be various.
The red tomato brand kind of almost doesn't exist without the farm name next to it. They really travel together. So we're always juggling the prominence of one or the other, but really the red tomato brand is what unifies everything we sell, and we want it out there with a very prominent farm name and location.
Good.
John, I had one observation that might go back to the very first question asked, and it's kind of a way of restating things for Barney, which I think ties up the whole point here.
Mm-hmm.
Barney, you in your presentation made reference to the early days when you were not packing at all and you'd ship stuff down the road, either to the co-op or to a large-scale packer shipper. And you said sometimes you'd get back at the end of the year and you'd realize that you had made around $4.50 or $5 per bushel, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Now we step into the present, and the returns to Sunrise Orchard before costs are deducted might be somewhere in the range of...
Well, I'll just tell you, in 2010 crop, which would have been the last crop we finished selling and completion, I mean, we're still dealing with this year's crop, or the 2011 crop, I think we averaged around $17.50 per bushel of total gross revenue divided by the number of bushels grown.
Okay. And so I bet there's a range in there of something like, $12 to $13 a bushel on up to, well, with the unusual crop of Honeycrisp, it goes into the $50 range per bushel.
I would go as low as $2.50 a bushel for those processed grade juice apples, all the way up to that extra fancy Honeycrisp at $50, yes.
Okay, so you got this huge range. But the point I was trying to make was that when people are trying to compare your early experience in the horizontal days of $4.50 or $5 to the current, where you've got this average of $17.50, and I know a bunch of the times we're paying you 18 or 20, and on your store route you might be getting 24 for stuff. What's hard to really fathom there is the cost side of the cost-price squeeze. So Barney can accurately measure the price side in different relationships and different varieties, but the cost side of that is really kind of the magic that helps to understand if you're making money on a particular part of your business. And I think that's why you can look at that and say, wow, Sunrise is doing way better now, but you kind of have to slow down and say, I don't really get that until I see all of the costs associated with that price increase, because now Barney is hiring all these extra hands that weren't working on the farm before, blah, 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 blah.
I mean, I can share what in 2010, the cost side was about $17.75 a bushel, so I lost money in 2010 because of shortage due to frost. We only we only raised 95,000 bushels of apples versus 140. So we kind of, that 140 allowed us to reach that break-even point, but it didn't, our scale, our volume wasn't quite there to push us over the hump into profitability.
Mm-hmm. Great. Michael, thanks for swinging back around on that. I think it really did kind of get to my question, and so that's great. Let me ask one more question, and then we're going to wrap up. So maybe you guys can reflect on this kind of quickly. The issue of price transparency. I know some farmers, you know, especially the ones that have diversified crops or maybe early into this, they're not quite sure how to price products. And so the question is, how important or common is price transparency in your world and relationship? And is there a way for other farmers to see what's being, what a good price might be? How might they manage that?
Okay, I want to be clear I get this. We're now wearing the shoes of the grower here, right? Your question comes from that perspective?
I think for the most part, yes, for the most part, but I think the part of the question is around transparency, say, across your growers, Michael, across the growers that you work with through Red Tomato, so both.
So in the red tomato world, we're 100% transparent. Growers can just ask at any point, and we're often talking about the whole deal, and every piece of it is it's part of the conversation.
On the grower, oh, go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
No, you go, Barney.
On the grower side, it's very unusual to have that type of relationship with someone selling your fruit. If you ask the question straight up to a different organization, you will get the runaround, and you will not get the answer, and it's very frustrating, and that's what I love about the relationship with Red Tomato.
And I'll say on the other side of our world, the customer, retailer, distributor side, it's not impossible to have brutally frank, open, honest conversations about pricing, and I think it's always okay to ask, you know, respectfully. And sometimes you get this very surprised because there are some more traditional, conventional people in the trade who feel fine about it, recognizing that it's no big secret. I think it's really worth exercising that muscle and just seeing what happens with sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
It has to kind of just you know, yeah.
Right. All right, folks. Barney and Michael, thank you very much for being such great resources today. I'm going to turn this back over to Jeff to take us home. Jeff?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I want to add my thanks as well, and also thank you, John, for moderating. There were tons and tons of questions. I apologize to all the attendees who asked these fantastic questions. We are going to try to figure out a way to address some more of these questions, but that was a tough job, John, and thanks. I know that I have gained tremendous new insight from this presentation, and I hope you have as well. I wanted to point out, though, that most of this discussion was focused on the producer-to-food hub buyer transaction. The National Good Food Network supports marketplace solutions all throughout the value chain, and I want to point out that we have discussed several different aspects of sustainable business models that increase access to low and moderate income consumers, and we have some webinars posted in our archive about those. Moreover, the Wall Center is now undertaking a 6-month in-depth study of models for food access, and will be presenting a webinar on the results of this study, so look for it in the fall of this year. So make sure you get yourself on our mailing list to ensure that you're aware of it when we air this. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived on our site, along with the nearly 3 dozen other webinars we've done in the past. Feel free to point others who you think would have liked to have heard this panel. I know I want to review the wisdom presented on this webinar and take some professional development time and dig through our excellent archives. Visit ngfn.org/webinars. This webinar will be up within a few business days. Our webinars are organized into topics if you look in the left-hand navigation area, so dig into whatever interests you. For instance, our July 2011 webinar was called Clearing the Roadblocks, Market-Based Strategies for Getting Good Food to All Communities, so some models there. We offer the NGFN webinars on the 3rd Thursday of each month, starting at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 p.m. Pacific. Sign-up links are always at ngfn.org/webinars. And coming up, we have 2 webinars in rapid succession. March 8 is a bonus webinar we're really looking forward to. The Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food initiative at USDA is a cross-agency effort focusing on local and regional food systems. In late February, the KYF initiative will be releasing an in-depth report and an interactive map cataloging USDA's extensive work in local and regional food systems across the country. In this upcoming webinar, USDA senior staff will tour you through these remarkable resources and demonstrate how they might be helpful for your work in the field. And the next week in March, we set our sights on getting more capital into your good food business. Michael Schumann will give us a dozen ideas on how to tap into the many willing but usually unavailable investors right in your backyard. Looking for creative ways to raise capital? Tune in on the Ides of March. If you want, you can sign up for the webinars on the post-webinar survey. We'll make sure you get registered automatically. Again, the easiest way for you to make sure you hear about our upcoming webinars and other Wallace Center activities is to sign up for our mailing list, also available on our post-webinar survey. I want to let you know about 3 other Wallace Center websites. Foodhub.info, that's .info, is a food hub of information, research, case studies, a map of many of the food hubs across the country, which we will soon be updating, even links to TA providers with experience in aggregation and distribution. If you are a TA provider or consultant on this webinar, you should take some time and create or update your profile at ngfn.org. This is becoming an established place for those in need of assistance to find their help, so you want to be listed there. There are over 180 individuals and organizations, and that number is growing. HuFed.org is our site for the Healthy Urban Food Enterprise Development Center run by the Wallace Center. This program and website is focused on increasing access to food to underserved communities using market-based solutions. On the site, you'll find a description of the initiative, grantee profiles and photos, and a library of some of the best food access resources. If you have a resource you'd like to share, let us know. Contact at ngfn.org or hufed@winnock.org. And foodshedguide.org is our site for producers wanting to adapt to the changing food business landscape like our presenter did today. In fact, as I mentioned, Sunrise Orchards is featured as one of the many case studies on the site intended to illustrate possible routes to success in the market. Foodshedguide.org. You can find the NGFN on YouTube, on Twitter, and on our website, ngfn.org. I'd like to encourage you to add your name, interest, and your bio into our database. And this is all part of the NGFN acting as a connector. Look for the database link in the resources section of our site. And if you haven't already, sign up for our email updates. Just let us know that you want to in the post-webinar survey, which we'll launch in just a minute. And our easy-to-remember contact email address is contact@ngfn.org. Thank you again for attending, and this concludes the webinar.
The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected.